The radical candor and fierceness were hugely important. Travis was never one to back away from a fight, never give up, whether that fight was with a regulator or the challenges of growing a market. Every single challenge, he came level-headed and prepared to figure out, and bring in people and listen to them and empower them to solve those challenges. The pain tolerance for things are going to go wrong, take a breath, dive in, stay objective. I got to credit to what I witnessed there. And I don't think I've witnessed it any other leader. There's going to be detractors. We're on the right path. We're going to do our best to get there. And when you get punched in the face, you got to jump back in. You can't stay down.
Welcome to the Early Podcast, where I interview the builders behind the world's most iconic companies. I'm Max Crowley. I was Uber's 25th employee and spent years scaling one of this generation's wildest rides. Each week, I sit down with the early innovators who really made it all happen. So please, tune in, like the show, subscribe, tell your friends, keep coming back. Let's go. Nick Mathews, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Max. How's it going?
Good, man. Good to see you. Let's start at the beginning. So you're from Massachusetts, and when I think of you, I think of Massachusetts. It's in your DNA. Where have you ever even left the state? Have you just been in Massachusetts your entire life?
I was in DC for 3.5 years as part of the Uber journey.
I remember that.
But I moved back swiftly after leaving.
You had to get back. All right. So where are you from exactly? And your parents are both psychiatrists. Is that correct?
Psychologists. Yeah. That's a good reefer for the interview in case things get out of hand.
Your parents are both psychologists. Where are you from, and what impact did that have on you growing up?
So I grew up in a small town suburb of Boston, like 5,000 people, unique mix of agriculture and kind of like new wealth. A town that was like really changing when I was growing up because I think it was 1988, year I was born. It got the best public school in Massachusetts like award, and it just created this almost like a migration of people into this old kind of farmy town that has the longest running agricultural fair in the country. Very, very unique small town growing up outside of a big city. And yeah, it was definitely formative, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I worked at this great mom and pop grocery store that really instilled values at a early age when I was 14, the moment I could kind of get a job. Still family run today. And most of my close friends, which I've realized the older and older I get is a rarity, are actually middle school, high school friends, and we actually stuck together pretty tight. So celebrate those rarities.
You end up at University of Massachusetts. It sounds like, from your perspective, it wasn't the education, it wasn't what you majored in. It was actually being in a band and touring and traveling that was probably most transformative or most impactful on you in your college career. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, I was definitely a mediocre student. Wasn't a huge fan of, I guess, like the busy work, heavy ADHD, that kind of learning style. I was a poli-sci major. I did enjoy the poli-sci-centric classes, but didn't have really an idea that I was planning on going into politics or anything, what that would be. It's actually with my high school band, we had started taking things pretty seriously in college. But we played like Bowling for Soup. It was this 90s pop rock band named after a Third Eye Blind song. And ironically, it's kind of like more of a retrospect thing, but a lot of the actual like business functions of the band, like the bookings, a kind of merch of managing a P&L in Excel, we didn't even know it would be called the P&L. There was a lot of very entrepreneurial aspects to it that was kind of a part of it that I really thrived in and took on. And then also like the marketing aspect of marketing a band back in 2008 to 2011. And so when I think of the formative pre-Uber experience and identifying like, oh, this is actually kind of the stuff I enjoy. I enjoy building and obviously like creating music, but tying that to how do you actually make that viable and go out and turn it into a vocation.
Well, I mean, how many shows did you guys end up doing?
Oh, like hundreds. I skipped 2 weeks of school. We went on a little self-books tour down the East Coast, all the way down. Like, I think the lowest show we played was in Macon, Georgia. And it was awesome. I think back to it, and I've actually gotten a lot more connected, started playing again recently. Everyone that grows up in the North Shore of Massachusetts eventually moves back. It is a pretty ideal place. And so there's a level of like, oh, got some free time now. Getting the band back together has been super fun. Doing a jam on Sunday.
All right. So you end up graduating. What's your plan out of school? You're a teacher, substitute teacher. What's the plan?
Yeah, definitely didn't have a plan. Graduated into the recession. I had done some interviews. I was thinking maybe a marketing agency, PR agency, was doing some contracting stuff, but needed money. And I ended up working in the Lynn public school system as a substitute teacher, like 2 semesters of it, which was like a formative experience. And I'm not sure if you saw The Wire. Like Lynn's outside of Boston, pretty urban environment, very low resourced school. And it felt like season 4 of The Wire in terms of just a lot of immense challenge and just trying to get these kids an education, make things work for them. Being in that situation where you're like 21 years old, trying to kind of demand authority from 13-year-olds, while also just being a substitute teacher. I'm sure you remember that. It really, I think, taught in hindsight an immense level of requirements of empathy and understanding in order to do the best job you could. It was super fun. When I joined Uber, it was between taking a full-time position there, so a parent teacher, or joining Uber. The 9-month parent role at a higher salary. I'm glad in hindsight, I think I made the right choice.
Was there any question that you would do the teaching instead of the Uber job?
No, the whole experience of learning about Uber and realizing what it was, and I think without being able to know the business buzzwords of what excited me about it, it was a no-brainer. And I think in talking to my parents about it, the power of them not understanding, but being like, this is what you got to do. Empathetic psychologist parents. It's a win in that book.
All right. So one of the members of the band, Pete, he ends up at Facebook. How did he end up at Facebook? Because this is like 2010 that he is at Facebook. Ends up being pretty early on. How does he end up there? And then what's your connection to him? And then how does that end up sort of bringing you to the Uber experience?
Yeah, we were friends since grade school. Super close. He's one of the smartest people I know. He was on a computer science track in college. And in terms of understanding that entrepreneurship was something that I did want to do, and that Pete was a huge factor in that. And so he graduated as an incredibly prolific coder at that point in time with multiple opportunities, ended up going to Facebook, was a huge part of the Facebook Instagram integration, was part of the core team working on React.js, which has become one of the most used agile frameworks in JavaScript coding. He had experienced Uber when I was out in San Francisco, kind of told me about it. He was out in Boston. It was when they were doing like secret Ubers in Boston prior to the official launch. If you remember that part of the playbook, we experienced it for the first time at that same, I remember like sitting on 3 season in Somerville of a friend, just like at the website, and they're like, oh, they're coming to Boston. It's real. I got to figure this out. I got to get involved. The most unique serendipitous aspect of it in terms of just the world being connected was in looking at the app in the App Store. One of the pictures was the driver app, and the profile pic for the driver app was this guy, Scott Monroe, who happened to be a UMass analytics graduate. They're using him as kind of, he was the first driver operations manager at Uber. And my buddy from UMass was like, I know that. And so he made introduction. I had a call with Scott, and he was like, if there was any question of like, this is what you want to do before, after, I was like, all right, I got to do this. Fast forward to conversation with Ryan Graves and Austin Gutt, a great walk around Cambridge. And they took a chance on a guy that had absolutely zero experience in tech, but a pretty big heart and a huge passion for kind of what I had seen at that point were like the 2 core things that were super exciting about Uber, which is one, taking on this like entrenched monopolistic industry, tax cartels, fit into the punk rock side of things. And the other, looking at the earnings opportunity on the driver side, the taking an underutilized supply, just like throwing a bunch of supply efficiency in there where it would lower costs and increase opportunity on the consumer side for a utility that is limited in Boston, which at that point in time, people didn't think about it anymore, but had a very strict medallion system, huge limitations in supply that was like self-capped through the medallion system. And so the Boston tax experience was awful at that point. And the idea of being able to bring in competition, have that meet in the market and provide incremental value to drivers and incremental value to riders was pretty awesome.
Why do you think they hired you?
I think the defining point was sitting in a cafe with Austin, and we had gone through all the stuff. I was like talking about like why I was passionate about it, the things that I would do, the opportunity and everything. And she just like stopped and looked at me. She's like, "Are you weird? Because you gotta be." I feel like he was like, "How's that question?" No, the answer. But
She could have just asked the question and just stare at you.
I think that had a lot to do. That there was just a kind of percolates into one of like Uber's biggest strengths, especially in that intro core. I joined in late 2011 to 2013 at our first kind of period of growth before we hit the growth at all costs hyper growth. Our hiring was immaculate in terms of hiring based on a mix of skill set, passion, ideological alignment, and really just mission alignment with every person that came in.
Absolutely. And I think there was obviously something about, and maybe you and I encapsulate it almost perfectly, which is you're the Massachusetts, Boston community manager and supposed to embody that market. I'm the Chicago version of that. And, grew up here.
There was one of us everywhere.
There was one, and Jen Joyce in Seattle, and, she's got the tattoos and fit the part perfectly.
No, it truly was. It was a huge part of the secret sauce and our ability to scale so quickly and efficiently and match that skill with growth. I mean, we can kind of get into that lineup, but I think that the fact that Uber really just built these kind of businesses within businesses, a massively data-driven approach to be able to create high-level goals and accountability, what we're striving for, and then allow for that level of independence and autonomy within those markets to run them as their own markets. Each market had a voice that aligned with the consumers and the drivers in that market. We were able to dig deep and have the pulse on the zeitgeist of the city because we were from the city. You'd solve city-specific problems. Boston had a massive challenge with tolls, and because of all the underground bridges, I remember we had the engineering team come out and do a day of literally just toll running with iPhones to solve this problem. And that experimentation and opportunity existed across all of our markets. Philly had a massive bridge thing where a similar thing happened, but the ability to have all of these independent sandboxes that could drive experimentation and combine that with just the immense amount of data and accountability that we had and the communication that early on, it was amazing to be so fragmented that early. You take it for granted now that remote work has become such a common occurrence. But I remember every week we sat down at the CM meetings, all of us, and everyone was talking about things they were trying, things that worked, that didn't. And when someone had something that worked, we were able to apply that broadly to scale, playbook it out. And it was part of the lightning in a bottle for sure.
I'm sure there's other examples of it, but got to be one of the first times that technology is used at such a physical, local level to really change something that's happening in real life. And then, of course, I think just some of the things that we sort of did, some of it was planned, some of it was opportunistic or happen chance or whatever. But the local teams was just an amazing phenomenon because you had people in every market building up these markets, representing the markets. And then I think about the weekly staff call where everybody jumps on once a week and you're looking at the numbers across the company and you've got engineers and community folks and everybody else in one place every week, looking at the numbers, bringing up challenges. And then cross-functionally, you're just all those conversations, all the best practice sharing, all the playbooking early on. It was just this wild lightning in a bottle mix that just helped the thing scale like crazy and it ended up being globally.
It was insane. And again, you don't want to take it for granted. And, thinking back, and I've done a lot of thinking ahead of this because it's been over a decade and a half since that. But thinking about the first maybe 500 to 1,000 employees, I think we didn't really hit a point where not everyone felt like they knew each other. It's still 1,000, which is just insane. I don't know. We have thoughts on how we get it. And again, it ties to the culture that we built and mission alignment and the fact there was a bunch of healthy competition, but everyone was really aligned towards the same goals. And we felt an immense amount of purpose for what we were doing. But you have to have all of those things together to enable a culture where you can have 30, 40 US cities where everyone knows each other and again, healthy levels of competition. All that competition is meant to drive for the best possible outcome. Kind of that autonomous meritocracy was just jaw-dropping.
So take me through the first couple of weeks. I mean, you get this job, your first job, and what's going on? There's secret Ubers on the ground already. We did this 4-week lead up time where you put some drivers on the road, but we didn't tell anyone we're live. But people that are there and then they know can start to test it. And then you do this launch event, go live. When do you join in that process? And then what is the next few weeks like?
I joined I think the day of the launch party. I officially started. And it was, I think the 28th or 29th of October. The first weekend was Halloween, which was a massive demand event. And so within from the beginning, it felt like
off to the races.
It's kind of crazy. It's like off to the races. We're like, shit, we are like tongue cars. How do we get 12? And trying to figure that do kind of like the initial messaging. I think my first exercise was around trying to like manage expectations and like proactively. Like the first thing I said was like a proactive, like, hey, like very spooky. Young's gonna be crazy. Like you're gonna be able to get your spooky Uber. You have to be patient. Like understand that we're new here. We're gonna do everything we can. And it's like the note of like anything bad happens. Here's my personal email, the nick@uber.com. Reach out. And I got people to email from that. With some horrible experiences.
I don't know if we did it in Boston, but that was the first time, or I guess maybe they had done it the years prior, but I think we charged 2x for every ride. So it was surge pricing before surge pricing, which was we just went, hey, let's just 2x the cost of the ride. There's going to be demand. And it was kind of the first, because I remember some of the emails we got were not super friendly, in the days after.
You can't just raise the prices. It has to be dynamic. I think we learned that very quickly. And that was before we had Kevin Novak, the godfather of Surge, come in and create like a truly dynamic market-based algorithm for it.
What do you remember about some of the early days of marketing? At that time, Facebook's really ripping. This is the early 2010s. You were very keen on online marketing, mobile marketing, the kind of social graph, sort of the early stages of algorithms and whatever else that is web and then becomes mobile from an advertising standpoint. Why were you so sort of on top of those things? What did you learn during that time? Because I know you end up, working on local marketing and things like that, really throughout your career since then.
I think it does kind of tie back to the early days of social media as a marketing tool for the band. Had learned like a lot of like where the power could be there and like having that kind of free broadcast mechanism. And as Facebook at that point was rolling out their social graph, it was super new and they were really just like trying to find different ways and create different integrations to drive adoption and see the different ways to use it. And so it was like before they were thinking about monetization, you could see that there were like different opportunities. One was like Facebook offers when they first came out. Our kind of go-to cost of acquisition for a rider was we'll give them $20 off their first ride, which for many riders could be a free ride if it's like short enough. And Facebook offers was basically a coupon. So like just putting that $20 ride code into that and then having it go viral through Facebook's algorithm until Facebook kind of tightened it up. You do those and get 500, 700 signups or run and then like rinse, wash, and repeat. And like was doing some testing around Facebook paid, and I think that our GM at that time, Mike Powell, saw that and saw the opportunity, and it did lead to him going out to SF and building the first performance marketing growth team at Uber.
Yeah, that was another amazing part of these local teams is that people would stumble on things. They would do something. You were sort of incubating it at a local level. You could then test it in other markets as well. And then over time, those became central functions, oftentimes led by people that just moved to San Francisco from the city teams. Did you guys invent the Uber ice cream trucks?
I will say, and I actually will give Powell credit for having that idea. And I think it was our first truly like on-demand stunt marketing that ended up becoming a tradition. The first one, at least since I joined, because we did it like summer of 2012. And, he pitched the idea. It's like, hey, what we've built beyond this like utility framework for transportation is this supply demand map technological framework on top of every city. How else can we utilize that? What are cool ways to kind of show off the technology outside of what the core use case is? And it was just like, hey, it's summer in Boston. How sick would it be to click a button and get ice cream on demand? It was such a rush. I mean, I remember like every year for the first couple of years that we did it, before it got like too big, that's not like a day off, right? We were just, all right, today we're not A-Fruit support tickets. We can't. We're going to have to like figure out, like get those in hindsight. We're hopping in to an ice cream truck with my buddy from upstate New Hampshire that drives down and owns like 4 Frosty trucks. And we're going around and we're hawking choco tacos to the community. And I think the biggest contribution outside of the core ice cream to Uber ice cream was the Uber Neon tank top, which was an ingenious part of our marketing. And let's never forget the fierce fighting that it took from Max Crowley to pitch that idea.
Yeah. I don't even know why I got that idea, but in the spring of 2012, all I wanted to do was create an Uber Neon tank top. And randomly, when we were in New York for the community manager summit. I meet Gary Vanderchuk at whatever dinner,
Yeah,
he was
that
an
dinner.
investor or whatever. Yeah. And then I tell him about it. He's like, yeah, sure. Why not? Like, why not buy some tank tops and see how it goes? And Travis is like, And then I email a couple of days later. I'll never forget that email. I email a couple of days later and I said, hey, can I get approval? And it's like also so funny that budgeting at that time, we had no budget for anything. So I literally sent an email to Travis to say, hey, I want to buy, 500 tank tops or whatever it was. And he responds immediately, I don't know why you'd buy one tank top, let alone 500. Fast forward, we end up buying like 100,000 tank tops or maybe more. I mean, it's an absurd amount of tank tops.
And like cities would have their own tank designs. It became like a cultural experience. And the first time that I walked into the gym in Boston and just saw a random guy wearing one, I was just like, oh man, like if anyone ever doubted this, like it actually had people were after to buy them. We could set up a merch store.
Neon on neon. That was the only rule though. It had to be neon on neon. For me, that was so formative from a learning standpoint because I'm just like, hey, I think this is a good idea, whatever. But everything was beat into us of what's the ROI on it? How many signups are you going to get? How many newbies? What's our conversion rate on those? How many will stick around? Everything had to be data forward or there was just no way it was going to happen.
Well, I think that one proved that it's about tapping into the zeitgeist. And I'm sure if you look at impressions of people tagging their like neon summer hashtags side of the brand ROI, even if that wasn't valued then. And, to this day, people ask me if I still have them. I've got a bunch in a lockbox. I'm like never getting rid of these.
Exactly. Going back to the Uber ice cream, I mean, it was so cool. I think it's wild that we did on-demand ice cream trucks, which again, you open up the app, there's like probably one car type at that time. And then you can toggle over and get an ice cream truck that actually shows up. It's a precursor of everything, right? Of DoorDash and of Uber Eats and all these things that, again, if you think about 12, 13 years ago, that was still like, yeah, you kind of had Grubhub, but you still couldn't just order anything you want, Instacart. You couldn't just order anything you wanted and get it delivered.
Yeah, I would like to believe that like the core of the underlying code for when we taxi, SUV, UberX, all the multimodal options, there's ice cream code in that code.
All right. So speaking of that stuff, I mean, I think the things that sort of stand out from the early days of operations, one is all the regulatory challenges. I mean, now in retrospect, Uber probably doesn't even think about all the regulatory challenges that existed. But what do you sort of remember from the regulatory bodies and the pushback that we were getting? Because pretty much every city had to deal with that. And that was another thing that we were working on at a local level.
Absolutely. And I think that was something that if you go back and like hindsight, the city teams operating and having that local presence, like trying to think through like how that would have been navigated at that point. Uber was just afar in this like San Francisco ivory tower trying to like remotely onboard everything on a city to city basis. It was something where you want to like think about how new and novel Uber was at that time. The regulators didn't really know what to do with it. And they're like, well, this is interesting. Like this concept of e-hailing. And I think there was also, and this tied back to the taxi cartels and like having kind of a state enforced monopoly with the medallion limitations. When you have the regulators regulating the taxi industry in any given market, there's a level of Stockholm syndrome there. And Travis had really described that, incredibly well around like the regulators get so close to the people that they're regulating, they become protectionist. And so you have this new opportunity that comes in and this new product that's basically just expanding the ability and access to cheap and reliable transportation on one side. So consumers are extremely excited about it. They're seeing an immediate value in what it's doing. And then creating massive increases in wealth and earnings opportunities on the driver side for these regulated livery drivers. It was something that when the cities decided that they didn't want to kind of understand it, the first reaction, this was the first reaction in pretty much every city, was like, we don't know what's going on here. We got to shut it down. And for us, I think there was a level of empowerment of like on both sides of the marketplace, there's an immense amount of value being created here, far beyond the value that Uber themselves are like monetizing or encapsulating. And when you had that, it's like, who's actually mad and why are they mad? And it was just such a justifiable fight to fight. And the way we were able to fight it on a city by city basis was kind of, well, it's not just our fight to fight. It's like, hey, people, is this valuable? Do you want this? Because they're trying to take it away and kind of building out the playbooks tactically for barely even playbooks at the beginning. It's just telling our user base that, if you value this, we want you to know that people are trying to make it not a thing anymore pretty instantly. And if you want to help, here's what you can do to help. And that created a really populist movement in these cities whenever someone was trying to come in and shut it down.
Why do you think that worked so well? Without cities and people, really constituents in those markets speaking up, I don't think Uber would have been able to be as remotely as transformative as it ended up being. Why do you think that worked so well?
For one, I think it was reiterating the value. It was providing an immense value and service that, like, once you had it, you had this kind of Batman utility belt. If late at night I need to safely get home, I can click this button. I don't have to risk calling a cab that's never going to show up. Cashless transactions, it's safer. All of the value props on the rider side. And then on the business side, financially, they're able to fill in their free time when they don't have reservations and just turn this on and earn, in many cases at that period in time, more than their core that they were making from their reservation-based business. There was no loser. The argument would be like the established monopoly was a loser because competition was coming in, right? Beyond that, when it actually having the voice to do it, because each city was operating as like an on-the-ground entity with a close tie to that city's identity, and it was real. It wasn't fake. Like it said, you're Chicago, I'm Boston. We love our cities, and bringing Uber to the city felt like a privilege and a responsibility. And so taken down, I guess, when those regulatory risks came to fruition and when enforcement was threatened and started, it felt very justifiable to like be reaching out to people and explaining the situation and educating them. And because we had built these relationships and been on the ground, and, every single rider that ever had an issue would reach out to Nick in Boston, and I'd do my best to solve their issue and, deliver happiness. There was almost like a level of rapport that it was crazy how we were able to scale it. It was obviously working like 60 hours a week just on tickets before you did 60 hours a week on marketing, and the fun stuff was definitely a part of it. That's it.
Yeah. Eat your vegetables.
To drive trauma.
So tell me about that. Maybe just give some context, because I think, especially in retrospect, I can't even imagine that any other startups do this, but everyone locally was answering all of the customer support for both drivers and riders. Obviously, we're managing the driver base. We're answering all the customer support tickets that customers send in. And so you end up having to hire up in these cities. Now, of course, it's all centralized and probably offshore and whatever else. But it was really a feature, not a bug, and probably somewhat random that it even happened that way. But so much of the growth early on came from this cycle of managing the community and marketing opportunities and whatever else. A lot of it stemmed from just Nick at Uber.com, Max at Uber.com, and whatever else is happening locally.
Exactly. And it was like the customer support was in itself a marketing function, but not because we treated it as a marketing function, because we just treated it as we're going to deliver the best customer experience. I think across the company, especially early on, there's this real alignment on, if someone has a bad experience, we're going to go beyond fixing it to mean, and we're going to turn that unhappy experience into an incredibly, like almost like more positive than if you took the trip post experience. And you do that by a means of not just say like, we're going to refund your trip, we'll give you a $5 credit for your next ride or something small like that. But it really came down more to the empathy and like understanding of what their problem was. And through that empathy and understanding what all of these problems were at scale, you were able to take the data. And so we saw what the actual problems that our riders and drivers were experiencing in real time. And we're able to deploy our strategy in solving those problems, as opposed to just trying to manufacture whatever problem we think blindly is worth solving.
Obviously, as you mentioned, the big aspect of the job is just local marketing, local growth, local business development, the fun stuff. You were a madman in those early days. You were at every event. You were Boston's sexiest man alive or something along those lines. Most eligible bachelor or something. You got named on some, wasn't it like best dressed?
There was a year transition when we'd started. Our like early adopters were obviously the Boston tech scene. And so our first shared space was in Kendall Square, like Boston Tech HQ, lots of biotech, lots of consumer tech startups and everything. The whole Boston tech ecosystem was most in tune. Where we naturally went from that as it like spread was into the lifestyle and nightlife, because it was a black car service still at that point. And so with that, it kind of became almost like running the marketing to pull through that as like a lifestyle business. We kind of had the branding to do it as well. We were sponsoring like charity events and black tie galas and all of these different things and providing them. It's a pretty strong sell. Like, would you like some help with your transportation? With anyone that hasn't used this, a free black car ride, like to and from. Those users were obviously, if you're going to a black tie event, more affluent users, but they were also, important, smart people that cared about their city and cared about these different things. And so going to those events and building the relationships, it's like you had the upfront ROI around direct conversion and acquisition of new users because they're like, hey, I'd love to take this free black car to and from this event. But then actually at the event was where the real work, real relationship building happened. A lot of those relationships that were built through it led to different partnerships and led to other event sponsorships as part of our field marketing on the ground event strategy. And also led to when we had these regulatory challenges, we had all these people that we had relationships with that we were able to reach out to, mobilize them, but also use them as like a feedback loop. This is kind of crazy. And I think it was really when the users were like, they're going to shut you down. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah, it's time to fight.
I think it's worth mentioning how close it was to Uber just getting shut down in so many of these cities.
So many places.
And
like down to hours at some points.
And obviously, now you look at the world that we're in today, and it's everywhere, and it's ubiquitous, and whatever else. It was near close. And it was this sort of cycle of we're interacting in the community, we're sponsoring things, we're everywhere. People are using it. It's growing. People speak up, they want to defend it. And yeah, it worked. So another aspect of that time is we go from this super high-end baller black car service. And part of Travis's genius, innovator's dilemma, he knew early on that we needed to differentiate and diversify and actually go more downstream. Taxis, UberX, True now, what is sort of known as ride sharing, sort of anyone being a driver. Where was your head at during that time? I remember some infamous argument that you and I got into about a year into our Uber careers in a hot tub in Tahoe, talking about taxi and whatever else. What do you remember from that time in sort of retrospect as you think about going from a high-end service to start and then going more mass market?
Yeah. Well, I remember our hot tub argument being more around the subsidy, like cost structure of it.
And like whether it would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Deep in the meniscus there. I'll put it there because there's obviously alignment around going downstream and increasing accessibility. I think the real driver of taxi, if I remember correctly, was Halo, the British company, scoring like a $25 million round and announcing they're coming to the States. And it was like, all right, well, compete or die. It definitely accelerated that push. We still have taxi as an option in most cities to this day, but it was a precursor to the understanding around what is the right way to service and be able to bring this to the masses and play with price elasticity, lower costs. It led to UberX being the predominant low cost, same quality in terms of navigation, in terms of access products.
Going to back to the Tahoe trip, I mean, again, Travis and just these different things that I think, were so brilliant, especially in retrospect. Workations, which we can touch on if you want to explain what that is. It ended up being somewhat annual, biannual, whatever, trips where he would just get the whole company to agree, we're going after some crazy audacious goal. And if we do it, we're going on a trip. And just this ability to kind of hone into numbers or specific goals that were really clear for anyone to understand. One of those was Tahoe. We had 100 people there. So the company was 100 people. This was September 2012. I think the next year we did Miami, we had 500 people.
Yeah, 400 or 500.
400 or 500 people.
That was
from
crazy.
Tahoe. What's the Travis Bear story? And then also, maybe you could morph it into who is Travis to define him as an entrepreneur?
A magical experience. The first time getting all of us together from this massive year of growth and hiring out was one of the earliest stages of the company. The magic was felt like second one, again, because we had all been talking on, was it Slack or HipChat? I think, actually, what was it?
I think we were using Skype at that time.
For months. And it's like everyone knew each other and just getting everyone together in person for the first time. Nothing needed to be said.
You mentioned it, but it's just wild too in retrospect that we were a dispersed workforce speaking on Skype before there was even good mass communication corporate tools and obviously pre-Zoom or anything like that. And just that ends up being sort of the world we're in today. So we all meet up in Tahoe.
That's where we had the taxi debate. And the story, as I remember it, I think the engineers were in a house, the executives were in a house, us marketers were in a house, and the driver operations were out. There were 4 kind of houses broken out, and we're like all meeting together to do this stuff. Everyone ended up coming over to the marketing house because obviously we're the funnest. But I remember this story of in the executive house, I think it was like the second night there, a bear had actually wandered into the house, and whether there was celebration and drinking involved, Travis really wanted to confront the bear and had to be told, I put politely with a level of fierceness that probably wasn't a good idea. And it does feel a little urban legend to me. I know that like there are definitely aspects of it that were true. Like the bear was real. Travis wanted to engage it. You want to talk about like he was a fighter. And from the beginning, he was a fierce believer in the mission and what it could accomplish, and long-term optimistic around the positive impact it could have. But what made him very well positioned for it outside of his immense intelligence and tenacity, he was willing to fight for it. And so I always think of that as kind of the urban legend anecdote of, yes, that level of fierce fighting, fierce competition, standing up for what you believe in is Travis to the core.
Totally. And it's not that he wants to fight the bear to fight the bear. It's like he wants to protect the group. The bear shouldn't be in the house, right?
The bear shouldn't be in the house. This is our hope.
So as things go on, I mean, kind of later years, what did you end up doing later on in your career at Uber? What other things did you work on?
So over the first kind of 3 or 4 years, we had scaled the Boston team to Team New England. We launched in New Hampshire and Rhode Island, had like sub teams doing that. I think my marketing team that I was direct managing was like 15, 16 people, which that's too many direct reports in my opinion and in hindsight, but did pretty strong with what we had there. My interest was really developed to the fragmentation that was growing with these city teams as we were growing and trying to figure out ways to keep the powers of the teams kind of united and have you create a more cohesive strategy because we're growing so fast. And, you know, we want to be able to like maintain that culture and team sharing. Eventually I went down to DC to lead the like business development, like event operations for our East Coast kind of like regional marketing. And in hindsight, I think the structure that we put into place there was not the right structure because it was like still kind of East Coast, Central, West. So we took the worst of trying to put all the pieces together instead of putting a proper Venn diagram overlap. But you know, that's for a paper or something. Led to moving down to DC, did that. At that point in time, I think it was like 2016 to 2018 was really when we had grown like 30 to 15,000 employees or so. At that point, we were international. We had China as a challenge that we were able to resolve and get out of, but like we're fighting fiercely in China, spending a lot of money. And at the core, I think we brought in buggies for a lot of like the HBS middle management GMs to kind of run these markets, and hitting a point where when Travis kind of had those challenges, where like eventually led to yes, and the company had gotten that big and trying to manage it, it created really for the first true time an environment that started developing into way too much internal politics and bureaucracy. Like everyone was competing with each other to win favor. The data had become so prevalent that it was able to be weaponized and used for like on like service level scrutiny. People writing reports and building things. Well, that's one interpretation of the data, but so everyone could win any argument they wanted to win. And that combined with chinks in the armor of the mission alignment that had brought us so close together and so far, that was when started to realize that it probably wasn't going to be here for a while.
To go from 2011 and being 30, 40 people to 2018 and there's tens of thousands of people and no Travis, just completely different environment.
Yeah. And in that middle period of chaos, like a lot of the critiques around what Uber's culture like was becoming, like some of those extra completely valid. Like it's fair to say that, especially when you have that much fragmentation that previously was united by common mission, it creates an environment where we're just like fighting internal battles as like, well, guys, like this is ridiculous. Like, what are we supposed to be focused on here? How are we going to find that single source of truth, right answer when everyone's starting with opinions, and those opinions might be good for them, but not necessarily for the company? It got pretty ugly, I think, in that period. My skill sets, despite being a poli-sci major, is not in bureaucratic political navigation. Not what something I wanted to get reps in. I'm getting rid of taxi cartels. They kind of went against the core with that amount of uncertainty. I think I had 8 managers in a 1.5 year period. Absolutely. This is ridiculous. And I'm really proud of what the company's been able to do over the past 7 years and where it's at now compared to where it was at that crucial point, able to recover out of that. And I think there's a lot of things that are being done now that great strategic opportunities. The company's in a much more stable place, at least from the outside looking in.
It's a true act too, luckily for the company and for us and for everybody that has worked out, which is great. When you look back and think about your 2 to 3 core learnings of being such an early employee at Uber, what stands out?
Everything is marketing is definitely something that it feels broad. So trying to bring it in, tying to the customer support and knowing our users and being able to have those conversations and build a rapport so that we were able to build a foundation in every city. Every single point of that data being able to come in and interpret it, leading to more informed decisions, and ties into the culture of Uber where we're so data driven that we were able to empower that level of local city autonomy with mission alignment and alignment on KPIs and goals to kind of get there. Platitudinal in a sense of listen to your customer. It's obvious, but I think the understanding of how to actually apply those listenings and those learnings and turn that into a very agile tactical roadmap that was changing week by week just requires an immense amount of pulse on the market that you're serving and an understanding of the value you're providing, and not just what you think you're providing, but how your customers and drivers, what the value that they feel, because that's what's more important. So not going off of assumptions, going on the actuality of what your consumers feel and what they find valuable about your product.
So everything is marketing is number one. What else?
Yeah. I mean, I think the empowering of autonomy was, thinking back, I don't even know how we did it with Sight. It's kind of crazy to think. Having the ability for each of these city teams that were operating basically on their own P&L, operating businesses within businesses, the true value of having that as a sandbox environment where we were able to be trying out tons of different things, solving things that might be unique to 7 cities in this one city, but there are 6 other cities that has the DNA. And so that learning can be applied to those. Really ties to communication. Uber Ice Freedom being something that came out of Boston and went to everywhere. Neon Tank, something that came out of Chicago and went to everywhere. The alignment of that with our culture where everyone was working towards this same aligned end goal. So when you had things that didn't work, I remember I did a promo. There's basically, I was attempting to do a college promotion, make t-shirts for 4 different colleges. There was a sign up. I would get whoever can, their college can get the most things signed up. They'll get a free Uber week. And just no one cared. And spent so much time on this, built out a multi-channel communication strategy. And I was one of the proudest ones. I presented the failure in the all hands meeting. Because it was just guys, here was the thesis. It didn't work. It's important to understand that because there are learnings from what our assumption of what's going to pump people up and drive that doesn't necessarily align with our end users. Empowering that autonomy, the ability to do that, learn from it, and then not just keep that learning to myself, but the opportunity was to share that. So no one made the same mistake twice. Just we're constantly improving. So it's that autonomy that comes with the mission alignment and communication that we had. And yeah, I guess that does tie into, there was another, it's around the collaboration. We had this healthy level of competition between markets. And it's almost as we had the perfect balance there where everyone was trying to, it's I'll one up you, but then I'm going to share it with everybody. Having those different benchmarks, they're doing this great thing over there. It's inspiring. It's I want to figure something out that's going to drive this immense amount of impact. There's a level of ego and I would spotlight there, especially in our younger years. There's for sure, and looking back, that drove a lot of it. Everyone wants the pat on the back because one thing Uber did poorly was we didn't really celebrate wins one-off. It was always on to the next thing. And then we had these kind of pumped up celebrations with, 10 to the X with Tahoe and those things where the entire company would come together and celebrate the accomplishments that we had made as a company. And so with those lack of celebration of individual wins, we were just really focused on moving on to the next thing and constantly learning, getting better, because it wasn't about you doing the best job. And the more you gatekeep from other people, it would look like you're doing a better job. It was the company, the better we can do as a company with these shared learnings, the more we can achieve as milestones as a company, the faster we can fix things that break, the more we have. There's this different issue. Like we were able to like look back into like all these past experiments, or was there something here that is relevant to that? It's like we had this constantly flowing ideation, but that ideation was tied to such well-documented learnings that were just so broad. It's not got a crazy thought, but it is. It does feel like crazy in hindsight that we were able to pull something like that off.
So after Uber, you end up starting your own company. It's called MainVest. How did you decide to start MainVest? What inspired you to start it? And tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, so MainVest was investment platform for small businesses. And it was basically, the idea was let's create a vehicle for communities to be able to invest in local businesses in their community. And it came from, a realization that access to capital for small businesses was kind of inherently broken through legacy lending. And there wasn't really a market alignment with consumers being able to, say, diversify and invest in business in their community. Almost like had a say in what businesses were coming to their community and empower local entrepreneurs. And, really the idea was predicating on when you have a bunch of people that are the end users that the businesses are serving, voting with their wallets, saying they want this business to come, and tying that to like, if this business is successful, they're going to get a financial return and build wealth from supporting those businesses. It leads to a higher performing group of small businesses. It's like not like, hey, I'm going to launch a ketchup flavored popsicle stand in Stowe, Vermont. I don't know if people think that's a great idea, but when you get the community's buy-in aligned with that capital, it leads to higher performing businesses, stronger alignment between local businesses that really do form the cornerstone of community identity and the consumers that they serve. And so what kind of kicked it off was, well, why hasn't this happened before? The fundraising and financial regulations, like the SEC, didn't really have a framework for what's called like a non-accredited investor to participate in investing in a private business until the Jobs Act, and specifically like Title III, which came out right when I was in DC. And what it did was created a regulatory framework called regulation crowdfunding to enable that. And it was something that was really designed for people to invest in the next Uber, the next Airbnb. But got super excited about it because the underlying framework you could retrofit to enable this kind of small business capital formation through community model. So left Uber in, I think my going away party was like March 2nd, 2018. MainVest was incorporated March 27th, got regulatory approval 6 months later, and kind of went off to the races.
And how much money did you end up raising? How long was the business active? And what was the outcome?
Over the course of the business, we raised $6 million from VCs. I put in 1.5 credit cards. There's a little bit of it at the beginning. Most of that was kind of towards the end, really trying. We ended up shutting it down in June of this year because the back-end payments provider that we had built the stack on went bankrupt and just didn't have the resources, or was personally tapped out to rebuild our entire back-end framework. And it was costly. It was tough. I'm honestly still recovering. But really the kind of story of MainVest was we raised our seed round in fall of 2019. For 3 or 4 months of building out, had gone 5 employees to 10 employees, launched our first remote market with Nashville, with like a obviously market leader on the ground in Nashville. And then the pandemic hit. Timing is important. It was a rough time to be launching a brick and mortar investment platform into a pandemic. I definitely put my heart and soul into it. And I'm still kind of feeling the burnings, but it was immensely rewarding. We put around 50 million of capital in the hands of small businesses. We're returning like a 12.5% annualized return. The end state theses were correct. The higher performing asset class is not like 90% of restaurants don't fail in their first year of operations when you had the community backing them. Surprise, surprise. But in the short term, if I could distill one real learning from it, the biggest learning that I've come to terms with was when the pandemic hit, that kind of 1.5, 2 years, we were still trying to grow as like a venture level and grow into like how is this going to affect it? A lot of that came with like the handcuffs we know how to do with Uber. In hindsight, we should have just stepped back and kind of taken some more time to navigate it. Might not have worked. I'm not sure if like people would have wanted to stick around. They kind of like wait out a pandemic, but it was tough. I would say there was never really a point where it felt easy. It was a complicated thing, a pretty audacious mission to trying to accomplish. And $7.5 million of capital was probably not enough, regardless of a pandemic. We got it there, but getting 500 plus small businesses funded and like operating, building those relationships. It definitely changed me as a person. Much higher appreciation, like actually like on the ground, like local economics, economic growth. Feel like a subject matter expert in that. And yeah, so finally shut it down in June of this year when we finally hit that wall that you couldn't overcome. Last couple of years before that, coming out of the pandemic, wasn't able to raise an A round. That's what I cut back, went on a profitability thesis and got pretty close. Like burn was like less than 10K a month by the end of it. But when you come up against an obstacle that you just can't overcome, we just didn't have the resources to solve that final problem. So working on writing down a lot of those thoughts and hope to be able to share that because I think there are some really valuable learnings there, both personally and across the scope for anyone looking to start a business. You hear so much about what goes great. Well, it's important to like actually get the learnings from what happens when things don't work out and there's no lack of effort out of the value in that.
What else does stand out for you? Look, you did put your heart and soul into this. There's absolutely no doubt in that. I think your experience having gone from one of the best time and place rocket ships in Uber to then starting your own thing and timing and other obstacles getting in your way. What else have you distilled down as the sort of core learnings from this experience?
I think like on a personal level, and this is also just a product of getting older, coming like pretty much straight out of college into Uber, going straight from Uber into MainVest and just being so in the trenches on MainVest, it's pretty hard to not tie personal identity to vocational identity. And I think that in the middle stages of MainVest, we found with this first challenge of navigating the pandemic and that sense of doubling down, to have done a much better job at trying to like separate and think of it more holistically. I think a lot of that has come over the last couple of years where I want to do it. There does come a point where it's like no matter, well, you could put 128 hours a week into something and have a bunch of people bought in, do the same. There's enough existential challenges in the way, like you're not going to get there. And so that kind of acceptance of failure is super important and empowering, I've realized over the last couple of months. But I think another one is we kind of had just started to achieve product market fit when the pandemic hit. And it was incredibly challenging having to go fully remote with everything on lockdown there and, hiring people that you had never met before, having people not be able to meet. You talk about all the powerful things about the early Uber culture and like what we were able to do there. There were so many of those tools in the toolkit waiting to be deployed. But right when that happened at that scale, everyone gets punched in the face. You got to step back and look, but it's incredibly challenging to at that early stage, it was pretty much like Uber in 2010, to be able to build that culture, kind of identity and bringing the right people and have everyone bought in with each other. And I think we did a great job at it, but it was incredibly challenging to do when no one's ever going to meet each other for like their first year working. Everything's remote and we're dealing with a bunch of on the ground assets that you can't even get because of quarterly government lockdown. So many things I'd like reconsider and do different. Excited to kind of talk through those learnings, but coming out the other side of it, it's super important to see something work super well and understand when things don't work well. You can grow a lot as a person from failures. I think I've realized that more and more in the last couple of months.
Well, you seem to be doing better, so I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, you didn't want to see me in June.
We wouldn't have done the podcast then.
I was freaking dead with it. It was rough.
All right. So a fun one to close on. What's a cool, interesting piece of content that you've consumed lately that you want to share?
So obviously this is prompt, so I had it prepared. I'm not going to go off the head and pretend I have. I've watched this maybe like once every couple of years, and I just rewatched it looking at the hyperpolarization that we're facing and we have been facing on both sides. And not to tie it back to MainVest, but one of the most pressing things about MainVest, experiencing it, like working on the ground, is the difference in terms of polarization when you feel it on a national scale versus when you're actually on the ground in these communities. Guys babysitting other family's daughter, it got completely different belief frameworks. In person, it's not that. And so thinking about kind of like what you can get wrong with predetermined assumptions and about like what's fed to you. There's a podcast, or not a podcast, it's a TED Talk from Mike Rowe, who was the Dirty Jobs guy in Discovery, that I try to go back to at least once every couple of years, because then it provides an immense amount of perspective. It's about the perspective and learnings that he got on the job. And I'm not going to try to quote it because he's actually a fantastic storyteller and orator. Used to be an opera singer. I'm not sure if many people know that, but out of San Francisco, like crazy story.
He lives in San Francisco. I would see him. I walk around San Francisco.
And understanding and trying to understand the importance of empathy and how we think about all of this different crazy shit that we got to hear on the media, like what's actually important, the importance of hard working. It goes in like trade jobs and that kind of stuff. And it's every time I finish it, I have a string in my step, because it creates a level of optimism alongside that kind of empathy and understanding. And I think it should be required listening for everyone. So if anyone's interested, it's like 15 minutes, dude. It's great. He's got some great allegory to ancient Greek. Just gotta listen to it, man.
Done. Well, we'll put it in the show notes and hopefully people can give it a look. Awesome, Nick. Well, you're the man. Thanks so much for doing this and look forward to getting it posted.
No worries, man. Thank you.